February 4th, 2020, Los Angeles. The Prince of Darkness, indestructible, outrageous, immortalized in myth, sat trembling, not from stage fright, not from another chemical blackout, but from Parkinson's disease. After surviving decades of excess, Ozzy Osbourne was finally facing the one demon he couldn't outshout, outdrink, or outlive. The irony cut deeper than any stage prop or publicity stunt. Here was a man who had been declared medically dead multiple times, who had survived every conceivable form of rock and roll excess, who had become living proof that some people are simply indestructible. The bat-biting madman who had terrified parents for decades now faced an enemy that couldn't be conquered with mythic defiance or anarchic survival tactics. Ozzy had beaten death countless times, but this time, death was patient. The tremor in his hands as he absorbed the neurologist's words was barely perceptible, but it represented something profound, the beginning of the end of one of music's most improbable survival stories. This was the man who had once urinated on the Alamo, who had snorted lines of ants, who had attempted to strangle Sharon during a blackout, and somehow lived to become a beloved cultural icon and devoted grandfather. The announcement sent shockwaves through generations of fans who had grown up believing Ozzy truly was supernatural. Social media filled with videos of his legendary performances. The bat incident that made him infamous, the theatrical darkness of Black Sabbath, the surprising domesticity of the Osbournes. Each clip felt like evidence from a trial where mortality was finally making its case against the seemingly immortal. Yet even this diagnosis couldn't diminish what John Michael Osbourne from Birmingham had achieved. He had helped birth heavy metal with Black Sabbath, survived its excesses through sheer stubborn resilience, transcended its limitations with unexpected vulnerability, and somehow transformed from working-class delinquent to global phenomenon. His journey represented one of popular culture's most unlikely redemption stories. Proof that change is possible even for those who seem completely lost. The contrast between his current frailty and past invincibility sparked conversations about legacy, mortality, and the true cost of rock stardom. But more importantly, it highlighted an uncomfortable truth. Behind the Prince of Darkness mask had always lived a vulnerable man named John, and that vulnerability, not the chaos, might be his greatest achievement. In the bomb-scarred landscape of post-war Birmingham, where industrial smoke mixed with the lingering uncertainty of a nation rebuilding itself, John Michael Osbourne was born on December 3, 1948, into circumstances that seemed designed to crush dreams before they could take root. The sixth of 6 children in a working-class family, he arrived in a world where survival often mattered more than ambition, where getting by was considered success enough. His father, Jack, worked the brutal night shifts at General Electric Company, his hands growing permanently blackened from metalwork, while his mother, Lillian, raised 6 children in a cramped council house that barely contained their energy and desperation. The Osbourne household was a study in organized chaos where attention was scarce and expectations were modest. Young John learned early that being noticed required either exceptional achievement or exceptional misbehavior, and misbehavior was considerably easier to accomplish. The Birmingham of John's childhood was a harsh teacher. The city's industrial landscape provided a constant soundtrack of machinery and smoke, while the social hierarchy was clearly defined by class, accent, and opportunity. Working-class kids like John were expected to follow their fathers into factory work, to accept limitations as natural facts of life, to find satisfaction in small pleasures and modest goals. But John was different in ways that became apparent early. He struggled with dyslexia and attention problems that made traditional education a nightmare, leaving him feeling stupid and frustrated in classroom settings. His academic failures created a cycle of low expectations and acting out that would define his teenage years. Yet these same learning difficulties may have enhanced his musical intuition. His brain processed rhythm and melody in ways that formal education couldn't capture or evaluate. Music entered his life through the radio and his mother's record collection, which included everything from the Beatles to classical compositions. He discovered that he could escape his daily frustrations by losing himself in songs, by imagining himself as the performers whose voices filled their small house. More importantly, he learned that music could transform ordinary emotions into something powerful and meaningful. His first band formed during his mid-teens, consisting of neighborhood kids who shared his hunger for something beyond factory work and council housing. These early musical experiments were crude and amateurish, but they provided John with his first taste of the transformative power of performance. When he stood behind a microphone, he wasn't the struggling student or the troublemaker. He was someone else entirely, someone with power and presence. The transformation from John to Ozzy began during these teenage years as he adopted the nickname that would eventually become more famous than his birth name. Ozzy suggested someone more dangerous and unpredictable than John, someone who might actually escape Birmingham's gravitational pull. The name change represented more than adolescent rebellion. It was the conscious creation of an alter ego designed to be everything John felt he wasn't. His brushes with petty crime during this period reflected both his desperation for money and his complete lack of direction. The brief imprisonment for burglary was humiliating but also educational, showing him exactly where his current path led. Prison was a preview of a future he desperately wanted to avoid, but it also revealed something important about his character. Even in the most degrading circumstances, he maintained a sense of humor and an unwillingness to accept defeat. Could these early experiences of failure and frustration have prepared him for the extraordinary career that lay ahead? The answer was surprisingly yes. His struggles with traditional authority and conventional expectations made him perfect for a musical genre that would celebrate outsiders and misfits. His working-class background gave him credibility with audiences who felt equally marginalized by mainstream society. The formation of Black Sabbath in 1968 represented the convergence of four working-class Birmingham musicians who shared John's hunger for escape and his willingness to experiment with darker musical territories. Tony Iommi, Gear Butler, and Bill Ward were equally products of their harsh industrial environment, equally eager to create something that reflected their reality rather than escaping from it entirely. The band's name, borrowed from a Boris Karloff horror film, perfectly captured their aesthetic ambitions. They wanted to create music that acknowledged the darkness in ordinary life, that gave voice to the fears and frustrations that polite society preferred to ignore. Their sound emerged organically from Birmingham's industrial landscape, heavy, mechanical, and slightly ominous, like the factories where their fathers had worked. Ozzy's vocal contribution to this emerging sound was crucial but initially uncertain. His voice lacked the technical polish of established singers, but it possessed an emotional rawness that perfectly suited the band's material. He could convey vulnerability and menace simultaneously, sounding like someone who had genuinely experienced the darkness he was singing about rather than merely performing it. The breakthrough came with their self-titled debut album in 1970, which essentially created the heavy metal genre by accident. They had simply been trying to make music that reflected their own experiences and emotions, but they ended up providing a template that countless bands would follow. The album's opening track, with its ominous church bells and Iommi's down-tuned guitar riff, announced something entirely new in popular music. Paranoid, released later that year, proved that their initial success wasn't accidental. They had tapped into something fundamental about the human experience that previous music had avoided addressing. Songs like Iron Man and the title track became anthems for a generation of listeners who felt disconnected from mainstream culture. The album's success established them as leaders of a movement they had inadvertently created. Yet success brought problems that none of them were prepared to handle, particularly for someone with Ozzy's addictive personality and lack of healthy coping mechanisms. The sudden wealth and attention were overwhelming for young men who had never learned to manage stress or pressure in constructive ways. Substances provided temporary relief, but created long-term problems that would nearly destroy both the band and their individual lives. The creative dynamic during their peak years was both inspiring and destructive. The four members pushed each other to extraordinary artistic heights while simultaneously enabling each other's most self-destructive impulses. Their music captured the chaos of their personal lives, transforming pain into art, but that same chaos made it increasingly difficult to function as a professional unit. The band's influence on popular culture extended far beyond their musical innovations. They helped establish the visual and theatrical elements that would define heavy metal, from dark imagery to elaborate stage productions. More importantly, they demonstrated that working-class experiences and emotions could be transformed into art that resonated with global audiences. Their relationship with controversy was complex and often misunderstood. While critics accused them of promoting darkness and negativity, the band members understood their music as cathartic rather than destructive. They were giving voice to emotions and experiences that society typically ignored, providing outlet for feelings that might otherwise fester in isolation. The tension between individual ambitions and group dynamics became increasingly problematic as the decade progressed. Each member was developing his own artistic vision and personal struggles, making collaboration more difficult despite their obvious chemistry as performers. The success that should have strengthened their bond instead created new pressures and expectations that tested their relationships. Was the success they achieved truly worth all the pain they endured? For Ozzy, this question would remain complicated for decades. The early Sabbath years established his reputation and provided the foundation for everything that followed. But they also introduced him to patterns of behavior that would take decades to overcome. The late 1970s found Black Sabbath at a crossroads that would define the rest of Ozzy's career and ultimately save his life, though not in ways anyone could have predicted. The band's creative unity was dissolving under the weight of individual addictions, musical differences, and the general chaos that had begun as rebellious energy but had metastasized into genuine dysfunction. Ozzy's behavior during this period became increasingly erratic and dangerous, not just to himself but to those around him. His substance abuse had evolved from recreational experimentation to life-threatening dependency, while his public performances became unpredictable spectacles that could range from transcendent to catastrophic. The Prince of Darkness persona that had once seemed like theatrical fun was beginning to consume the person beneath it. The decision to remove him from Black Sabbath in 1979 was both inevitable and devastating. The band that had been his entire adult identity, his only source of income and self-worth, had concluded that he was too unreliable to continue. For someone whose sense of self was so completely tied to his role as a performer, this rejection felt like a form of death. Yet this apparent disaster became the catalyst for the most successful phase of his career. Sharon Arden, daughter of music industry veteran Don Arden, saw potential in Ozzy that he couldn't see in himself. Her belief in his solo prospects provided the foundation for a partnership that would prove both personally and professionally transformative. Sharon's influence on Ozzy's career cannot be overstated. She brought business acumen, strategic thinking, and most importantly, genuine care for his well-being to a situation that had been characterized by exploitation and neglect. Her management style combined fierce protection of his interests with honest assessment of his limitations, creating a sustainable framework for long-term success. The Blizzard of Oz album in 1980 established Ozzy as a solo artist capable of matching or exceeding his work with Black Sabbath. Songs like Crazy Train and Mister Crowley demonstrated that his artistic vision had matured rather than diminished during his forced hiatus. The album's success proved that audiences were hungry for his particular brand of theatrical darkness. His solo tours during this period became legendary for their combination of musical excellence and outrageous theatricality. The infamous bat-biting incident in 1982 was both an accident and a perfect encapsulation of his public image. He had intended to bite a rubber bat thrown on stage, but got a real one instead. The resulting headlines established him as rock's most unpredictable performer while nearly killing him from the subsequent rabies shots. These theatrical elements weren't just publicity stunts, they were genuine extensions of his artistic vision. Ozzy understood that heavy metal was fundamentally about transformation, about allowing audiences to experience emotions and energies that ordinary life couldn't provide. His stage performances became rituals of release and catharsis for both performer and audience. Yet the personal costs of maintaining this image were enormous. The constant pressure to be outrageous and unpredictable took a toll on his mental health, while the substance abuse that fueled many of his most memorable performances was slowly destroying his body and brain. He was trapped in a cycle where his greatest artistic successes came from behaviors that were literally killing him. Behind all that chaos, was there an unbearable pressure that nobody saw? Friends and family members from this period describe a man who was genuinely terrified of disappointing people, who felt that his only value lay in his ability to entertain and shock. The Prince of Darkness was often deeply insecure about his worth as a person rather than a performer. His marriage to Sharon in 1982 provided stability and protection that probably saved his life, though it didn't immediately solve his addiction problems. Sharon's willingness to confront his destructive behaviors while supporting his artistic ambitions created a framework for gradual recovery that would take decades to fully achieve. Did this period represent his creative peak or simply the establishment of patterns that would define his entire career? For Ozzy, the solo success of the 1980s proved that he could survive and thrive beyond Black Sabbath, but it also established expectations and behaviors that would prove difficult to modify as he aged. His continued solo career during this period showed remarkable consistency and evolution, demonstrating that his artistic abilities had matured rather than declined with age. Albums like No More Tears, 1991, and Down to Earth, 2001, revealed sophisticated songwriting that addressed themes of mortality, redemption, and family responsibility with unprecedented honesty. He was learning to channel his natural chaos into more sustainable forms of creative expression. The transformation of his public image accelerated dramatically with the reality television show The Osbournes in 2002. Suddenly, millions of viewers who had never attended a metal concert were able to see Ozzy in his domestic environment, revealing him to be a confused but loving family man rather than the supernatural force of destruction his stage persona suggested. The show captured the daily reality of a household where extraordinary fame coexisted with ordinary domestic challenges. This television exposure introduced Ozzy to audiences who would never have discovered him through music alone, while humanizing him for fans who had only known his theatrical persona. The series revealed that the Prince of Darkness was also a man who struggled with technology, worried about his children, and genuinely loved his family despite his obvious limitations as a traditional patriarch. More importantly, it showed a family working together to support a member dealing with addiction and its consequences. The show's impact on addiction awareness was significant, though unintentional. Viewers witnessed the ongoing challenges of recovery, the family dynamics that both support and complicate the healing process, and the reality that sobriety is a daily choice rather than a permanent achievement. Sharon's role as both enabler and protector became visible to audiences who began to understand the complexity of loving someone with addiction issues. The success of the Osbournes represented both triumph and vulnerability. Ozzy had achieved a level of cultural recognition that few musicians ever reach, becoming a household name across generations and demographics. Yet this mainstream acceptance required him to acknowledge publicly the very vulnerabilities and struggles that his stage persona had been designed to conceal. His children's participation in the show also revealed the intergenerational impact of his choices. Kelly and Jack Osbourne's own struggles with addiction and mental health became public knowledge, demonstrating how family trauma can perpetuate across generations. However, their willingness to seek treatment and speak openly about their challenges also showed that cycles of destructive behavior can be broken with proper support and intervention. The family's openness about their struggles helped normalize conversations about addiction, mental health, and family dysfunction that had previously been considered private matters. Their willingness to display their imperfections challenged stereotypes about celebrity families while providing hope for other families facing similar challenges. His health problems during this period, including the near-fatal ATV accident in 2003, began to highlight the cumulative physical costs of his decades of excess. Each medical crisis became a reminder that the seemingly indestructible performer was actually quite mortal, that the body could only sustain so much damage before demanding payment. The accident, which broke multiple bones and required extensive surgery, marked a turning point in his understanding of his own vulnerability. The relationship between his public image and private reality became increasingly complex as he aged and faced health challenges. Fans wanted him to remain the wild man of rock, but his family needed him to prioritize his health and stability. These competing demands created ongoing tension that would only intensify as he entered his 70s and faced more serious medical issues. His continued touring during this period demonstrated remarkable dedication to his craft and his fans, but it also revealed the difficulty of maintaining a high-energy performance style while dealing with the accumulated effects of decades of substance abuse. Each concert became a small victory over his physical limitations, but also a reminder of how much his body had been compromised by his earlier choices. The final decade of Ozzy's active performing career has been marked by a poignant struggle between his determination to continue entertaining and his body's increasing inability to support his ambitions. The Parkinson's diagnosis, first made privately in 2003 but publicly announced in January 2020, provided medical explanation for symptoms that had been developing for years. But it also represented a fundamental shift in how both he and his audiences understood his future. The tremors and mobility issues associated with Parkinson's create particular challenges for a performer whose career was built on physical energy and unpredictability. Simple tasks like holding a microphone steadily or walking confidently across a stage, activities that had once been automatic, now require conscious effort and careful planning. The disease attacks the very motor functions that had made his stage presence so dynamic and commanding. Yet his response to this diagnosis has revealed character traits that were always present but often overshadowed by his more dramatic behaviors. His determination to continue performing despite obvious difficulty shows the same improbable resilience that had carried him through decades of other challenges. The Prince of Darkness refuses to submit quietly to physical limitations, even when those limitations are beyond his control. His farewell tour, announced as No More Tours 2, a reference to his 1992 No More Tours farewell that lasted only 2 years, has taken on profound emotional significance for both performer and audiences. These concerts represent not just entertainment, but historical moments. the last opportunities to witness one of rock's most significant figures in his natural environment. Each performance carries the weight of an ending that everyone recognizes but no one wants to acknowledge. The physical challenges of these final performances are obvious to anyone watching. Ozzy moves more slowly, speaks with less clarity between songs, and requires more support from his band and crew than in previous decades. Yet when the music begins, something of the old magic remains. His voice, though changed by age and illness, still carries the emotional power that made him famous, still connects with audiences in ways that transcend technical perfection. His recent studio work has taken on autobiographical significance that his earlier material often lacked. The album Ordinary Man, 2020, features songs about mortality, regret, and gratitude that feel less like theatrical exercises and more like genuine confessions from someone who has reached the final chapters of an extraordinary story. Tracks like Straight to Hell and the title song address his health struggles and family relationships with unprecedented honesty. The follow-up album Patient No. 9, 2022, continued this introspective approach while demonstrating that his creative abilities remained sharp despite his physical challenges. Working with longtime collaborator Andrew Watt, he created music that honored his heavy metal roots while acknowledging his current circumstances. The album title itself references his medical experiences with dark humor characteristic of his personality. His family's role in supporting these final performances has become increasingly visible and moving. Sharon, despite their own health challenges and decades of marriage struggles, remains his fiercest protector and advocate. Their children, Kelly, Jack, and Amy, have become essential components of his professional operation, helping him navigate challenges that go far beyond typical tour logistics. The contrast between his current limitations and his legendary past creates a bittersweet atmosphere at these concerts. Audiences come to celebrate his legacy but must also confront the reality of his mortality. The man who once seemed immortal is clearly facing the end of his performing career and possibly his life, creating an emotional intensity that transcends typical concert experiences. Were these final years marked by acceptance or continued struggle against limitations? For Ozzy, there appears to be little distinction between the two. He has always defined himself through struggle, through the act of overcoming seemingly impossible obstacles. And his battle with Parkinson's represents simply the latest challenge in a life characterized by mythic defiance against overwhelming odds. Ozzy's greatest trick was never biting bats or shocking parents. It was surviving long enough to become the grandfather of metal, proof that even the Prince of Darkness can find light in improbable resilience. Today, as Ozzy faces his final years with Parkinson's disease and the accumulated effects of decades of choices that took tremendous tolls on his health, his story takes on the characteristics of a complex modern fable. Not because of its ending, but because of its demonstration that recovery and transformation are possible even for those who seem completely lost. His musical contributions to heavy metal's development cannot be overstated. Black Sabbath's early albums provided the sonic blueprint for an entire genre, while his solo career demonstrated that metal could be both artistically sophisticated and commercially successful. Songs like Paranoid, Iron Man, and Crazy Train became anthems that transcended their original audience, proving that heavy music could achieve genuine cultural significance. Yet his cultural impact extends far beyond his musical achievements. He became a symbol of working-class aspiration, proof that someone from the humblest circumstances could achieve global recognition through talent, persistence, and willingness to take risks. His Birmingham accent and unpretentious manner kept him connected to his origins even as his success elevated him far beyond them. The reality television show The Osbournes fundamentally altered his public image, revealing the man behind the Prince of Darkness persona. While the show introduced him to new audiences and humanized his image, it also demonstrated something profound, that people struggling with serious challenges can still be loving family members, that chaos and care can coexist, that recovery is an ongoing process rather than a destination. His relationship with Sharon became central to understanding both his survival and his legacy. Their marriage weathered addiction, health crises, public scandals, and the intense pressures of fame, ultimately demonstrating that love and partnership can survive even the most extreme challenges when both people are committed to growth and mutual support. The question of whether his lifestyle choices were worth their costs remains complex. His decades of substance abuse caused genuine damage to his health, relationships, and memory, creating problems that persist decades after achieving sobriety. Yet his willingness to discuss these struggles openly has helped normalize conversations about addiction and mental health, topics that were once considered shameful secrets. His influence on popular culture's understanding of addiction and recovery has been significant, though complicated. His public struggles with these issues helped reduce stigma around seeking help, while his survival story provides hope for others facing similar challenges. However, his exceptional constitution and access to resources make his story unique rather than universally applicable. The charitable work he and Sharon have supported, particularly foundations focused on addiction recovery and cancer research, ensures that his experiences have been transformed into resources for positive change. These activities demonstrate that even the most destructive experiences can ultimately serve constructive purposes when properly channeled. His current battle with Parkinson's disease adds another layer to his legacy as someone who refuses to surrender to limitations. His determination to continue performing and creating despite obvious physical challenges provides inspiration for anyone dealing with serious illness or disability. The Prince of Darkness has become a symbol of resilience in ways that transcend entertainment. The man who once represented chaos and rebellion has evolved into a figure who demonstrates the possibility of redemption and growth. His transformation from destructive performer to devoted family man shows that people can change fundamentally, while retaining the essential qualities that made them unique. His journey suggests that survival itself can be a form of victory, that simply continuing to exist and grow can be profoundly meaningful. Ozzy's greatest achievement may not be his music or his survival, but his demonstration that even those who seem completely lost can find their way back to connection and purpose. The Prince of Darkness became a beacon of hope for anyone who has ever felt hopeless, proof that no one is beyond redemption if they're willing to accept help and continue fighting for better days. Do you think Ozzy's survival story provides a realistic model of resilience, or does it represent a one-in-a-million miracle that few others could replicate? When you think of his legacy, do you see the chaotic Prince of Darkness biting bats, or the confused but loving father from the Osbournes? Which era defines his impact more? Black Sabbath's creation of heavy metal with Paranoid and Iron Man, or his solo breakthrough with Crazy Train? And how should history remember him? As chaos incarnate, or as living proof that redemption and transformation are always possible, even for those who seem completely lost? The answers may vary depending on one's perspective and experiences, but Ozzy's own contentment with his choices suggests that he has found peace with both his achievements and his mistakes. In choosing recovery over self-destruction, family over fame, and wisdom over chaos, he created a legacy that transcends music and speaks to anyone who has ever needed to believe that change is possible, and that tomorrow can indeed be better than today.